Hello and welcome to Fleet News Group podcast. I'm Caroline Falls and today I'm speaking with Steve Lewis, a managing partner at Evenergi, an Australian advisory and software company helping fleets transition to lower emission vehicles. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you, Caroline.
Steve, I reached out to you after looking at a paper you presented at the AfMA conference for fleets in May this year. And boy, how times have changed since then. Inflation, war in Ukraine, mounting supply chain issues from tight and expensive shipping to COVID-induced labour shortages. Also, a more EV-friendly federal government has been installed. Your paper, I think you presented it just right on the eve of that election. So let's look at the EV landscape as it was then and as it is now. But first, tell me a bit more about Evenergi, its foundation story, who its customers are, things like that.
Great. So Evenergi started in 2016 by a man named Dan Hilson, an Australian, with the ambition to help fleets to transition to zero emissions options. Our business has expanded to basically help people on the entire journey of that process. So all the way from the first phases of working out what's the transition framework and more of an advisory type piece of work, all the way through to then software which can help you to model detailed design and then actually operate depots and do smart charging and demand management. We do work, a lot of work in Australia, but also we have offices now in the UK, the US and India. And we do work at all the different government levels. So a lot of work for governments on the strategic side, working out from both fleet transition and on charger strategies and charging strategies. And also now starting to see a lot of movement just starting in the commercial space, and that kind of leads to your other point around some of the things that have changed in the last 6 months. The thing that's really sparked it with us is probably led to a degree by the federal government, but also the amount of vehicles that are now just starting to become available, opening up a lot more options, and starting to get the interest of the commercial market too. So starting to see a lot of interest from logistics companies and other people with large complex fleets.
And among your clients, the ACT government, one of the most progressive in Australia, that's one of your clients, is that right?
Yes, correct. So we do a lot of work for ACT, also New South Wales. Definitely have to give New South Wales government a shout out. I think they have by far and away the largest investments in renewable tech, and we do a lot of work for those guys, both on the public transport bus side of the business or side of the government, and also on their own 20,000 strong fleet of vehicles as well.
Okay, so let's just get into some of the nuts and bolts of what's going on. I was, just wanted to talk about charging infrastructure. Like, is it being built quick enough? Is it being done well? There's a lot of big names and partnerships jumping in, like Ampol with AmpCharge for one. Talk to me about, what's going on in that space.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic. It's really good to see companies jumping in and governments incentivizing that. It would almost be without exception now. Each state has at least some level of plan and strategy around that, and is starting to look at linking up the differences. And I think that's the key thing, is that really with all of that infrastructure, it needs to have that level behind it where there is someone who's done that demand planning about where the routes are and where the grid is, and then making sure that you're putting the charging infrastructure in the places where it's going to be needed to enable people to get from one destination to another, and make that inclusive of all parts of Australia, being a very big and a country where a lot of long distance driving is required to move from one place to another. But also that it's linked into the grid too. One of the things that we really do quite a bit of work on, and I think it's going to be really important, is once we start to get more and more fast charging, which is really the networks that these guys are putting in, that is going to be a large constraint on the grid. And so we need to do that sensibly, because if we don't, we're just sort of seeing in the news at the moment the potential for large increase in electricity prices. And if we don't do this sensibly, we're going to end up creating much higher peak demands, and then we'll continue to see further increases in electricity costs, and can be avoided. It just needs to make sure that we do the charging in a smart way and use what we have, rather than make solutions that require whole new electrical infrastructure to be built.
And talking about energy and constraints on energy, I mean, this is just also one of the things that in a depot, in their own charges that they have in their own depot, Evenergi must be helping companies to understand, what they can draw down from there. Is that right? Do you have, how do you help a company in that area?
Yeah, it's really important to make sure that you can get the charging strategy right. So it comes, first of all, working out what are the use cases of your vehicles, what type of charger is best suited for that, and typically we sort of recommend that you pick, the slower the charger that you can get away with, the better. That's why destination charging is really kind of the way that EVs like to be used. It is a bit of a change. Our mindset with a traditional petrol or diesel engined vehicle is you kind of run it down to near empty and then you just fill it straight back up, because you're doing it en route and it's not done at your destination. With an EV, you kind of don't want to do that 0 to full at a particular point in time. What you ideally do is you want to park the vehicle wherever you're going to park, and then while it's parked, it just gets topped up, so that when you come back, it's all full, and you don't have to sort of do that en route charging. When you're talking in depots, that's kind of the ideal charging for a typical mixed fleet. If you're talking buses and sort of waste vehicles that do have such a high load, they still end up needing even sort of slow DC charges is the best way to charge those things up typically. And you're talking megawatts by the time you even work out in a smart way how buses need to be charged overnight. So really, really important that you get that right. And even working with the grid operators, we're doing some work at the moment where we're taking not only live feed out of the buses to know what the buses are going to need, but also a live feed from the grid operator to know what capacity is available on the network, and then trying to make those two things line up. Because as you would know, the grid is built around the peak in electricity requirement, which is usually only for a small part of the day. So we definitely don't want to increase that peak, but it does mean there's a lot of time outside of that peak that can be used to push more energy through the grid, and that's a good thing for the grid. And so if we can make the charging line up with that time, that actually helps the grid to be more cost effective, rather than adding to the peak and adding to the costs of the grid.
Let's just take a nod to a couple of years ago when one of the most memorable lines in the EV debate was leading government politicians suggesting EVs would ruin the weekend. I mean, how much has that helped grow the knowledge level in the community? And I do think that statement helped liven the discussion. There's even a Facebook page along the lines, ruin the weekend.
Yeah, I think I would say that.
Yeah,
I think I would see that line quoted at least once a week when anything new comes out, or someone does a trip all the way through the back of some random part of the world, and then it's just to make it with an electric vehicle. But yeah, look, I think it did sort of it did challenge that, and I think it did bring it did give EV enthusiasts a catch cry. But it's really, it's starting to be disproven in almost all sort of facets. There's still work to go, absolutely, before it's it's a thing you can just drive out, particularly if you're towing a boat or something like that, and not have to think about where you're charging. But you know, you've already got vehicles that are in the market now that have got that sort of 500k range on them, which is well and truly enough to get to, you know, most places you can go for a weekend. And you're starting to see now in the models that are coming available, you're starting to see some of those having you know, significant tow ratings. So, you know, it won't be too many more years, and those vehicles will all be pretty commonplace and will be available. And, you know, once you're at that point, you'll also, what you mentioned before, the public charging infrastructure network will have grown as well. And I think you will get, you know, a couple of years back to that point where it'll be quite normal to just run out with a boat on the back and not be leaving your house wondering about where you're going to charge next.
We'll be back after a short break for a word from our sponsor, Sofico Services.
Sofico is a world-leading provider of enterprise software for the automotive leasing, finance, and mobility industry. For more than 30 years, international leasing companies and OEMs count on Sofico's expertise and technology to help them transform innovative product concepts into streamlined business processes and engaging customer experiences. With more than 370 experts, 8 offices on 4 continents, and an annual growth averaging 15%, Sofico is perfectly positioned to help its customers succeed in a rapidly changing market where electrification, shared fleets, and multimodal mobility challenge us and our customers to play a pioneering role. Continuous investment in people, innovation, and leading-edge technology is the basis for continued growth and success.
Just yesterday, the last day of October, was the closing date for submissions to the National EV Strategy. Did your organisation make a submission, and you know, what did you call for?
Yes, we did. So the key things that we were sort of looking for, which we also were, you know, working in conjunction with the Electric Vehicle Council as well. But the fuel standard, I think, is a really important one. You can literally see, like, I think New Zealand's a great comparator at the moment to look at a country that has a fuel standard, and almost every single vehicle is coming into New Zealand, you know, a few months ahead of Australia at the moment. And you know, you've got it's good to see that a bunch of the vehicle manufacturers are now starting to make more commitments to Australia, but a number of them have come out in the past and said that, you know, until you put a clean vehicle standard in place, where we've got other countries that are going to be more highly prioritised. So I think that's really important. And then the other thing which we were pushing for is a national standard around what charging infrastructure is available. So building a platform that can feed websites like PlugShare. It can be available for vehicle manufacturers. It can be available for people building new grid networks, and you want that to know all of the public charging infrastructure which is available when it's in use and not in use. So collecting a little bit more data than the current systems would collect. And have that available to everybody. So a vehicle knows it's getting low, it can put into its GPS where's the nearest available charger and just throw directions onto its screen to tell you how to get there. Existing websites could use that to make sure they're capturing all of the chargers available, and it even starts to work into then the whole billing side and making that so you don't need to carry around. One of the things in the UK that they're seeing, being a bit further advanced down the field than we are, is to deal with the charging networks all being independent, you kind of end up need to carry around the equivalent of 10 different charge cards or 10 different fuel cards if you're sort of talking old language, to make sure that you can actually use the charger that you find. So some of those sorts of things you can build platforms to integrate exactly the same way that, say, ATMs have in the banking world. And now, if you remember back 10 years ago, you could only go to a couple of different ATM brands, and now that's kind of changed, and you can just go to whichever one you sort of see and pull money out, and all of the transaction management happens in the background. So something similar to that, I think, is where we should be looking to get to with electric vehicles and charging as well.
Oh, I agree that definitely has to happen. Hadn't even thought about it like that yet. I wonder if you've got an opinion on the latest federal budget, where they confirmed that they will bring in EV tax concessions, the fringe benefit tax and import tax, in a form that will particularly, maybe almost only, affect the business community. What's your reaction? Is it anything to crow about? Will it make any difference?
Yeah, absolutely, I will. I think you get, I think they sort of say it's like the fleets that bring in, what is it? I forget the exact stat. I won't try and quote one in an interview that I'm making up. But a lot of new vehicles are purchased by fleets and then make their way into the second-hand market. So it is definitely a very large way that new vehicles are purchased. So it will target that. And the other thing that I can see, so a lot of our customers have a bunch of utes and light commercial vehicles in their fleets, and are looking at what are their options at transitioning those, which there's starting to be some options, but they're still a bit on the limited side at this point. One of the things that we're starting to look at is, because those fringe benefit taxes, which you already get on utes, of course, they will now apply to reasonably priced electric vehicles as well. It's some of those vehicles that you currently have as utes, could you start picking small SUVs and therefore open up a range of electric vehicles that you can start your transition to now? Because there is a lot of cases where people have utes, but the tray only gets used once every few months, and it's really a question is, if you had a small SUV, could you just put it in the back of the SUV anyway? And so that's a thing that I think the FBT changes have really opened up, because that's a good material chunk of the price of the vehicle, which is tied up there, so can really make the difference between that being a yes or being a no.
Just talking about those sort of vehicles too, they might even fit into some of the last mile delivery areas where there's a significant opportunity for EVs. And when you realise that, as you said too, that so many of the new vehicles coming in are purchased by initially by fleets, and you realise also that the task of reducing emissions in transport is largely down to the fleet community, and this last mile delivery has to be one of the areas for any fleet to knock off first. Trial an EV as your delivery vehicle. What do you see happening in that area?
Yeah, 100% agree with that, and it makes sense for two reasons. It makes sense for all the things you just said about, there's a good chunk of emissions tied up in that world. It's a growing part of the network as well. There's a lot more of that happening than there was 5-10 years ago. But it's also quite a good use case for electric vehicles. It's kind of almost the perfect world where you do a reasonably high number of kilometres each day, but you're not doing big, long radial trips where you're going to start to really challenge the range of a vehicle. A vehicle doing 150 to 200 k's a day, that's well within the range of the vehicles that are coming to market right now. And it means that over the course of you doing that every single day of the week, you end up with a lot of kilometres by the end of the year that you've done. And as we all know, electric vehicles, they cost a little bit more upfront, but then their running costs are much lower. So if you can find use cases where you are doing lots of kilometres, you tend to get a much better payback. And you're getting instances now where the actual electric vehicle over when you add up all of the costs of its life cycle, they're starting to actually be, there's a commercial benefit in changing over to an electric vehicle already, which is really great to see, because that's going to be the real swinging point for these sorts of businesses, right? They are a commercial entity. They're, as well as their environmental obligations, they also are looking to make a dollar. And so if we can get the solutions to the point where it's ticking both of those boxes, that's going to be where it really just opens up. And that's not far away. So there's a bunch of vehicles. Europe's already got a whole lot. New Zealand has a couple now that haven't arrived in Australia yet, what we're saying before, but they're not far away. And so once they start to arrive, it's really going to start to open up a bunch of those options. And then there's even a few, as I said, we're up in India, and so I was up there not long ago, and looking at some of the options that they're doing up there around small vehicles that do that last mile delivery is also very exciting.
Yeah, like the little tuk-tuk. In fact, tomorrow I'm going to a launch of, I think it's possibly the first electric tuk-tuk in Australia, which is being brought in by last mile delivery group called ANC.
Yep.
Yeah, interesting. Just talking about the number of models and variants now in Australia. You've mentioned a couple of times that it is expanding. And your group keep a pretty close eye on this, don't you? You put out a report, I think, every quarter on availability.
We do. Yeah.
Well, I don't know if you've got one in front of you, but what's coming soon? What can you tell us? And are you particularly keen on anything that's coming in soon?
Yeah, I don't have one open right now, but the key things the things I'm most excited about coming through is some of the new commercial vehicles that are coming from the big Chinese manufacturers, like the LDV electric ute T60. That's the first ute that's going to be available in Australia. It is only the first one coming is 2-wheel drive, so it's not going to tick off the 4-wheel drive box, but it's a start, and there's a bunch of use cases that you don't need the 4-wheel drive for too. So that's really exciting to me, because you're getting a bunch of those sorts of vehicles. That it's a massive part of the Australian fleet, and to date it has had no solution that is zero emissions alternatives. So super exciting to start to see some of those things, because all of our customers are saying, yeah, we want to transition. What vehicles do we have available? And in the sedans and the SUVs, you're starting to get a good range of options to meet most use cases. That small commercial space is starting to get a few options as well. Buses have got a great number of options now. The ute is the last bastion that we really need a couple of good options for. So seeing a few things like that coming through into the Australian market shortly will be really exciting. And I know there's a few other utes that are sort of on their way as well. So hopefully within another 6 months, we will start to have a good couple of options that we can start picking from.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you for your time today, Steve. It was great to talk to you about all things EV.
No problems. It was my pleasure. Thank you.
You've been listening to Fleet Auto News podcast. It was edited and produced by Isabella Fiorentino. Thank you again to our new sponsor, Sofico Services. It's great to have you on board. The original theme music for this podcast was created by Isabella Fiorentino. You can follow us on Spotify. Just search for Fleet Auto News. We're also on Instagram, Facebook and YouTube. Our website is fleetautonews.com, where you can get all our stories, videos and podcasts. Until next time, Drive safely and take care.